The Signature Bank Studios. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. In advance of last night's debate, the Democrat National Committee, their Politburo, had to select somebody to go speak to the press and properly frame what Republicans were going to say. And so they chose Madison, Wisconsin Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway, who came to Milwaukee and had this to say.
So I would suggest that anybody thinks that this country is in decline, come to cities. Because Democratic mayors all across the nation are creating great places where people want to be, where growth is happening, and where our economy is growing.
Milwaukee has one of the highest violent crime per capita rates in the country.
But they tried to make it look so pristine and nice and nonviolent yesterday when they did the exterior shots of Milwaukee.
It's fun to say that when you're a granola Subaru driving socialist from Madison who comes down to the big city. When you preside over a town of 250,000 people, probably 60% are connected to the University of Wisconsin. So when you have 45,000 undergraduate and graduate students at a university, which is largely government funded, it's a company town and it's government funded. Yeah, it's easy to pave the streets with gold, Mayor. You can't get away with that in the big cities that are command controlled by your fellow travelers. Anything more than your population, where you can't just, even with employers still being, the biggest employers still being government, like in Chicago, when it's CPS and City Hall and Cook County government and federal government outposts, you can't get away. It's just not enough to cover 2.7 million people in a place like Chicago, much less to say New York, LA, San Francisco, and other cities. But I appreciate the effort. I really do. The second funniest comment about the brave new world happening in urban metropolises was actually Trump's. Now, his was intentionally intended to be funny, as opposed to the Madison mayor. Trump's interview with Tucker Carlson, where he talked about EVs.
The happiest moment for somebody in an electric car is the first 10 minutes. In other words, you get it charged, and now for 10 minutes. The unhappiest part is the next hour, because you're petrified that you're not going to be found another charger. People, I'm saying, if people, I'm not knocking electric cars, they're fine. They're fine. But if people want to buy a gasoline car or a hybrid, hybrids are pretty good, actually. But they should be allowed to buy. They don't want to do any of this. So right now, California's in a big brownout.
Yeah.
Because they're grid.
And
it's like the best day of your life is when you buy a boat, and the best day of your life is when you sell your boat.
The next best day. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. And he must have been reading about the EV graveyards in China, who, since we're pursuing the same industrial policy that they did. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Chris Whalen. Of course, he is an investment banker. He is the chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, and he's the author of Forward Men, From Inspiration to Enterprise, also the editor for the Institutional Risk Analyst. Chris, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning. Greetings from California.
Oh, boy. All right.
On vacation? Or
are you sitting in the dark?
Getting ready for the next debate at the Reagan Library? What's going on?
No, I'm up pretty close to San Francisco, actually, but fortunately not in the city.
I recommend the Doom Loop tour there.
Yeah, you should do that and report back to us.
What about what the Madison mayor said? You know, you want to see American greatness, then you go to a Democrat-run big city.
No, these guys have a big problem. As soon as we find a conservative that can articulate all of this a little better, they're done. Because, you know, even people that support them nominally in terms of policies, when you get to the point that security is your paramount concern as a parent, then you have problems. You know, people generally look for good places to live, good schools for their kids. And when they're dealing with negative and they're forced to move because of security issues, then that's the end for the Democrats. I think we're going to have gun ownership universally in this country because you won't be able to go into a city unless you're armed. That's where we're headed. New York is a case in point.
And so, and again, I mean, as we've been talking about for months and years on end now, then where are we now in terms of the quote unquote doom loop visiting more dire consequences that have been visited thus far when you're talking about the economic vitality of these cities?
Well, look, it's very simple. Watch the pricing for commercial buildings in big cities like Chicago. The real deal covers this wonderfully, by the way. And as the prices go down, the tax rolls go down too. It's a very slow process. It takes years. But you're already starting to see people predicting that New York, Chicago, some of these other municipalities are going to be downgraded by the credit rating agencies. And once that happens, you start heading for junk, and then you are junk. And that's how people treat you in the markets. So,
the other thing that's happening this week is a lot of big retailers are reporting lower earnings reports and suggesting it has to do with softer consumer spending, but they're also using this phrase shrink. Target, Dick's Sporting Goods, Walmart, Home Depot, Foot Locker. Shrink remained well above the sustainable level where we expect to operate over time. They're talking about retail theft in metropolitan areas. That's what they're talking about.
Yes. And there's two things that they do. Either they close the store or they take a lot of the high-end products out of the store. So there's nothing to steal. And, during COVID, you saw some of this because volumes got very low in the big cities, New York particularly. And so you started seeing drugstores closing. They just couldn't justify keeping them open. This is the same thing. Big companies move slowly, but once they realize a store is a loser and that it's being hit deliberately and in a methodical sort of way, they're going to close the store. And so all the communities that depend on that store, the normal people, suffer. And again, they're going to move. So it's a wasting process. The Democrats don't seem to understand that when you cater to the lowest common denominator, that's where we all end up, right? That's it. They have to aim high, and they don't have that narrative right now. The Democrats have no narrative except catering to chaos, really. That's a kind of a cute phrase. Maybe we should use that.
Catering to chaos.
Make it a hashtag. So
it'll be like, Mad Max in Chicago. We could have races.
Now, I'm sure I don't want to be presumptuous, but did you watch the GOP debate last night? Or parts of it, highlights?
No, I drank wine with a large client and stared at the fog. It was good.
Just how big was that client?
Yeah, please. We want to hear more about that. Well, I was just wondering if anybody.
No, we're going to protect the innocent. It's a big publicly traded REIT that does real estate. So,
so
they wanted to hear what Chris thought about the Fed.
Oh, okay.
It was great fun. Good people.
I was just wondering if anybody had an economic plan, or maybe you do, to turn this ship around.
Well, the plan is we have to start going back to the great phrase my father coined, the silent majority. He was the one that came up with that phrase for Richard Nixon as a speechwriter. And that's really hasn't changed. The politicians think that they can focus only on the extremes in our society, and yet you have 60, 70, maybe 80% of the people standing there waiting for someone serious about governing to step forward. We were kind of hoping that's Ron DeSantis. But I'm holding out for some others. I don't know. We'll see.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the decay in the cities. Just as the cities were seen as economic engines that helped to propel urban sprawl into suburban enclaves. Do you have any message for suburban residents who think that they've escaped the city, so they've escaped the city's problems, and they can live in suburban Chicago, on the leafy streets, cobblestone-lined streets? They can live without consequence again, like they once upon a time could in the city. It seems to me that urban areas socialize their problems to suburban areas, and that can happen again. So if you think you've escaped to the North Shore from the city of Chicago, the problems don't have to respect corporate boundaries. The problems in the cities do not respect corporate boundaries.
Well, it depends on the jurisdiction. If you're in a jurisdiction where the police are still enforcing the law, Westchester County, New York, for example, then yeah, you can. But the 5 boroughs, forget about it. The city's just given up. They barely support the police now. So it really depends. I mean, I'm an hour outside of the city, so I feel pretty good about that. But I take your point. One of the reasons I'm not on Long Island is in case I have to walk out.
Right.
You don't want to be on an island where you have to go through New York City because that could be problematic. So I think you're right. The issue isn't going to go away by having affluent people of all descriptions move to the suburbs, but they are moving. This is why people have moved to Florida, which I think is crazy. But
hey,
they like low taxes.
There's somebody sitting in front of me.
Yeah, exactly.
Moved to Florida.
Yeah, Naples is a little slice of heaven. Let me tell you.
I know. But for me, the Hudson Valley is where I belong. I'm sorry.
I understand. Well, you're a big shot. I'm just a little guy trying to eke out an existence here. All right, I'm trying to enjoy some time on the beach and the golf course. What about this momentous meeting in Jackson Hole this week? What is Jay Powell going to do to continue to rescue us, allegedly, from poor fiscal policy inside the Beltway?
Well, this is my big problem with Chairman Powell. He won't talk about fiscal policy. That's his job. He should be jawboning Congress about these issues. Powell is going to do 2 things on Friday. He is going to try and set the table in terms of giving us a little bit of guidance about when we're going to stop raising short-term rates. I think they're going to raise them to 6%, which is pretty dramatic, and then they're going to stop. But the trouble is he's not willing to sell the bond portfolio he accumulated, the $8 trillion worth of stuff. And if you don't drain that liquidity out of the economy, then we're not going to deal with inflation quickly. It's going to take a couple of years. You keep the rates where they are today in housing and other sectors, financing for commercial office buildings, for example, is just not going to happen. So you're going to see a lot of default activity in the next 12, 18 months, I think. And Powell, is going to just accept this because in the back of his mind, he's trying to protect the Fed. He knows he screwed up in 2019 by buying all those bonds. And then in 20 with COVID, he doubled down again. And the result has been a lot of problems. 3 bank failures. We could see more. By the way, the 10-year Treasury, which is your surrogate for mark-to-market on the banks, is up around 4.3% today. That means the banks are going to report ugly numbers in the third quarter. It's just simple math. The average mortgage coupon in the U.S. today is 3.6%. So think about the price of that security that holds that mortgage. It's like 80. So, Powell has put a lot of problems into the banking system and into the economy in the name of fighting inflation, and the economy is ignoring him. That's the most interesting part of all of this, is that the private sector is still rocking along. We're all buying NVIDIA this morning.
Yeah, right. Well, and how long can that willful blindness continue?
Listen, it's like the sun also rises, right? How did you go bankrupt?
Gradually,
slowly, and not all at once, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I think that what you have to realize is that Americans are spoiled. We are a very affluent society, as that great author said. And I think that what's going to happen is we have to hit a brick wall. We have to have a default event that shakes the very foundation of this country. And then you'll start getting serious people in the mix. Right now, we don't have any serious people in Washington. Washington is kind of like the 1920s before the Great Crash, if you think of it. Filled with dilettantes, filled with all sorts of opportunists who really don't care about the country. They're just there to make money for themselves. That's the problem. We need Mark Twain. It's a shame he's not alive. He could describe this for us very well.
Chris Whalen, investment banker, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors, author of Forward Men from Inspiration to Enterprise, and editor for the Institutional Risk Analyst as well. Chris, enjoy sunny California. Make your way sunny and
I'm going home today. Happy summer.
California.
Enjoy it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Well, it's hot out here. It's hot and foggy.
Yeah. Climate apocalypse. All right, Chris, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
See you guys.
Hot and foggy, quote of the day. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.